Hello and welcome back. This is part 4 in my review of Jordan Peterson's new book, Beyond Order. In this part, I will discuss rules 4, 5, and 6. Rule 4 says, notice that opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. In simple language, this rule is about being a good worker, taking the initiative, figuring out where others have failed to take care of something, and then claiming responsibility for it, volunteering to take care of that. When I'm employed in an organization, I can either see what is expected of me and meet those expectations, or I can actively search for things I could do, going beyond other people's expectations. And as a result, make myself, in Peterson's word, invaluable. Peterson argues that taking the initiative isn't just about career advancement and becoming valuable in the eyes of others. It's also about living a meaningful life, since one source of meaning is the challenges we face voluntarily. Even when we fail at these challenges, we learn from our failure, and that is vastly better than not trying anything, being completely passive. Another aspect of being a conscientious worker is about being able to delay gratification and think about long-term happiness, long-term goals, as opposed to just immediate satisfaction, happiness. Like the other rules, this rule shouldn't be taken, of course, as the only guide. Who would disagree with the statement, it's better to be active than passive, or with another related statement, it's better to be happy in the long term than be happy at this moment? These are platitudes, which are, in this case, dressed up with a little bit of Egyptian mythology and some anecdotes from Peterson's clinical practice. But we don't encounter questions in the treatment of this rule. I mean, deeper questions. We don't read, for example, why is it that most people are inclined towards passivity, despite knowing deep down that being active is better, that being active for a person is a superior state, better for everybody? What does that say about our societies and cultures that we are more inclined towards being passive? So that's an interesting question. That would lead to an interesting line of thought. When we don't address the root of a problem, the best we can achieve is a temporary burst of emotions, feeling motivated for a short while after reading, for example, this book or any other self-help book. We get a temporary burst of motivation and then losing that motivation shortly after. This shows up also in how students deal with their problems like procrastination. A student who procrastinates can just push herself or himself with rules and say, I must not abdicate this responsibility. Or instead can investigate an underlying problem that is causing procrastination, asking, why am I not inclined to do the work? A line of inquiry will lead us to new questions, while forcing ourselves with new list of rules is like casting a spell again and again that generates only sparks, but no real consequence. The emphasis on work and being a good worker reminded me of Andrew Taggart, the philosopher, and his critique of what he calls total work. I'll leave a link to a representative article by Andrew Taggart. The idea is that work isn't the only source of meaning, although it can present itself as such and dictate its logic, its grammar of meaning in other areas of life, to the point that everything, including our vacations, the way we go on a holiday, our romantic relationships, everything ends up being expressed with the grammar of work. Everything it takes the form of a logic of work. Everything becomes working, basically, another form of working. There are other domains where meeting a challenge or overcoming an obstacle, the grammar of work, isn't the appropriate metaphor. We could think, for example, of friendship or leisurely activities. Another problem with this rule, or any rule that endorses working as hard as you can, is that it presupposes complete trust in the organization where you work. I remember reading some statistics about income disparities between CEOs and average employees at major American companies. And I'm sorry if these facts are too well known. I still would like to repeat them in the present context to put this rule in one other context other than Peterson's own. So in 1965, the income disparity, the income of CEOs were 20 times larger than the income of the average employees. Whereas in more recent years, the CEO's income was 350 times larger than that of the average employees. I'm not saying that working hard is bad. I value hard work myself. But it is also good to be mindful of who benefits from our hard work. What breaks my heart the most, what is more relevant to me personally in academia, is the hard work of many PhD students, which benefits above all their supervisors. They're advisors who are already safe. They're not really taking any risk. They only benefit from the hard work of the PhD student. The students are typically underpaid, overworked, overstressed, uncertain, facing a hopeless job market after graduating. Telling them that they should do more work and always look for more things to do would make me feel uneasy. Again, I'm not against working hard, working with passion, developing a passion and working towards it and sacrificing. But this rule reminded me of Boxer, the horse from George Orwell's book Animal Farm. Let's move on to Rule 5. Rule 5 offers a different perspective. It says, quote, do not do what you hate, end quote. The concept hate isn't adequately dissociated from unpleasant feelings. I think it's not adequately discussed at all what it means to hate something. Because hate can have so many root causes. You can hate something just because of classical conditioning, like associating, an accidental association with something can be a source of hate. Should you quit doing what you find unpleasant? Is there a moral aspect to this rule? Is this rule about knowing yourself and your interests? Is this rule balancing the effect of the previous rule, Rule 4? We could interpret it in that way as in, don't work for evil organizations, which gives it a very strong moral dimension. The text of this chapter is mostly devoted to a criticism of political correctness and its growing effect in organizations. We read about one of Peterson's clients who had a difficult experience at work due to issues related to political correctness. He gives a series of advices based on that client's case, but the advice is quite vague, again, based on platitudes, and doesn't have anything to do with challenging the structure of an organization. It doesn't have anything to do with taking meaningful action in a way that is not personal. It's not just related to yourself. Toward the end of the chapter, we read that the client is still struggling to find a position after switching jobs, I think 2 or 3 times. The main example of the chapter, which is that client, fails to support the message, the collection of advice of Rule 5, this chapter. There isn't much else in the chapter. There certainly isn't a discussion of personal interest and trying to find out more about your unique aims in life, finding your unique project. Faced with a workplace that you have, for whatever vague reason, come to find troublesome, we are simply encouraged to be hopeful and courageous and consider other jobs. That's the aim of this chapter. Fine. Let's move on to the next rule. Rule 6 says, abandon ideologies. What does Peterson mean by ideology? At some points, he appears to be referring to simplistic frameworks. If I have a simplistic theory or univariate theory about the world, I am, according to this position, ideologically driven. What about simplistic theories that try to promote peace and love for the world, that encourage universal brotherhood or sisterhood among all humanities? Is that ideology? I don't think so. I don't think that would fit Peterson's definition of ideology. Is ideology about drawing a clear and fixed boundary between good and evil? I think this is closer to what Peterson means by ideology. Lazy dichotomies that map onto good and evil. So dividing things into easy categories and then associating those 2 categories with one is good, the other one is bad. Unfortunately, he contributes to some of that lazy thinking whenever he talks about a whole host of things: Marxism, postmodernism, anarchism, nihilism, or atheism. I find it especially troublesome that Peterson continues to assume, based on his interpretation of Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, that atheism necessarily leads to ideology and mass murder, when we know that religion itself can be and has been weaponized by ideology. So the presence of religion doesn't guarantee absence of ideology, just like how the absence of religion doesn't guarantee the emergence of ideology. If we accept such simplistic relationships, we are falling into ideology, according to Peterson's own implicit idea of this concept. Could we say that ideology arises out of the desire to do more with a given theory? To take Marxism, for example, and do more with it than it can do. A theory that works in one place for one set of phenomena becomes an ideology when we try to forcibly extend its scope to everything else. A psychological theory like Peterson's theory about the experience of meaning, where meaning, subjective meaning, comes from, can become ideological when it turns into a theory about everything, including ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, religion, mythology. That ideological check will bounce because it is overdrawn. It is trying to do too much. This is an important point for those of us who are offering careful criticism of Peterson's work. When I or others find fault with Peterson's work, we are not necessarily saying that it contains falsehoods or vacuous statements, although it does. What we say is that it is being extended beyond its own domain. It is trying to do too much work, be the answer to too many problems. And this might be rooted in Peterson's desire to solve as many problems as he can. But he certainly seems to want to have all the answers, to do as much work with his ideas as he possibly can, with the risk of turning into ideology. Give us too many rules and then hide behind the innocent looking reasoning that I'm just trying to encourage the young men or the young people. So that's an excuse. He's trying to do too much. He's trying to certainly do more than than just encouraging. He has turned into an institute. But then when we criticize him, he turns into that excuse of, I'm just encouraging. I'm just being an uncle figure or father figure, which is really an abdication of responsibility. It is very easy to come up with a rule and say, abandon ideology. It is apparently much harder to resist the temptation of ideology in action. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have questions, comments, please feel free to leave them below. I will continue the discussion in the next part.